Hey guys, how are all of you doing? Hope fine, and yes, this is the next part of Game of Shadow in Naruto world. Where I am in the Naruto world. I have a name that isn't mine and I have a really nerfed version of the gamer. Is that all? Am I forgetting something? Right, inventory. At that I received yet another disappointment. Let's start without any delay. Nothing, again Teiya hissed. When I find these fuckers, I'll put them in a genjutsu so bad they'll from there. IG simply tuned out. Maybe he should have told her to keep it down. There were I1 in around to witness her outburst and manners, after all. However, neither he nor the locals were very concerned with her foul mouth at the moment. The boy's red eyes scanned through his surroundings. Not only that though, he tried his best to catch something with web sense too. He found nothing though. Nothing but the crater that had been left behind by the explosion that had rang the alarm through Han's defenses. As Teiya put it, this kind of thing had happened a lot since they arrived. What is more, from the reports he'd read, this had been going on for a while already. What Deidara and Sasori were trying to achieve with this, he didn't know. Were they trying to bait them out to leave Han by himself? That had been covered, since only IG and Teiya had moved to answer the alarm, leaving the rest with orders to stall and call for reinforcements if anything happened. He also made sure to rotate who moved out. The only constant being that Tamrai and himself were never in the same group, since they needed to be in charge of one each. Were they trying to check what the defenses were? That didn't make sense either. They had to know how things were by now. It even showed in the attacks they made. They are distracting us, but from what? IG thought with a frown. Let's go back, he told the redhead. If you would let us know if you find something, that would be appreciated, he directed to one of the I1 in currently investigating the scene. The only sign that he was heard was a slight grunt, but IG simply nodded at that and started moving. At least they were actually working with him, which was all he needed. He wouldn't and couldn't ask for them to like it. This is getting really fucking annoying, Teiya grumbled next to him as they walked back to Han's place where everyone else was waiting. What the hell are they trying to do? That's what I'm trying to figure out, IG mused out loud, long past the point of caring about how the girl spoke. Once we arrive, I'll be meditating for a bit. I really want to piece this puzzle together before something happens. Are you asking me to play my flute? Because you could be more polite about it. Isn't that the shit you are always on about? The girl asked with a sneer. IG simply gave her a lazy smile. Well, since you don't care about manners, I guessed I wouldn't either. At least when dealing with you, he shot back before turning to the front. But yes, that would be appreciated. IG didn't have many clear memories of his past life anymore, but he was pretty sure that listening to music had always helped him concentrate. Or, at least, it would allow him to tune out his surroundings, which might as well be the same thing. He really needed it at the moment, especially if he wanted to think through the current problem. It wasn't like he was completely against what was happening. The longer the Ataksuki pair took to make their move, the more he could train his team and, more importantly, himself. Senjutsu kept steadily, if slowly, improving, and his next original jutsu was almost ready to be used. He just couldn't help but continue making tweaks to it. It had to be as perfect and powerful as he could possibly make it. He took a deep breath in. Good. I was just about to tell you to calm down, Hakai told him, and IG suppressed a wry smile. He was getting better at keeping his mind calm and pushing away thoughts that could disturb Tsuchigumo. The beast herself sent a wave of appreciation his way. If only for that, he would try harder. "Everything all right, creepy eyes?" Taeya asked from next to him. Her tone wasn't one that could be called concerned, not even remotely, but he took it as that. After all, he knew she wouldn't be caught dead expressing soft feelings. "I'm fine," he reassured me with a wave of his hand. "I just want to get this over with and go back home. All this playing around they are doing, it's getting on my nerves." "Just don't let it get to you," she said, and he blinked, surprised. "Wouldn't want you to beat the shit out of us if you explode," the X sound Nin added, and he nodded. That made much more sense. "Almost worried you had been replaced with a fake one for a second there," he told her with a half smile. Naturally, she wasn't the least insulted. She knew how she was and she was completely unrepentant. "Anyway," he started, a little louder than necessary as they arrived where everyone else was. "Taeya, tell Tamrai what happened." "Jirobo, you are training against Kabuto and Yuki again." "I'll be meditating for a bit." "Tamrai, I want you to go over what we know once you are caught up and then we'll discuss this together." "Taeya, after you are done, you know what to do." All of them stood straight as he spoke before nodding. In a matter of seconds, they all went their separate ways to do as ordered, leaving IG and Han as the only people remaining. The boy looked at the pair of girls for a moment, ensuring that they were actually going to just talk instead of starting a fight. "You think this is within your abilities to achieve this mission?" Han asked, adding the last part when IG turned to look at him, confused. "I'll finish the mission and it'll be a success," he replied. "There's too much at stake here." The man hummed. IG expected him to add something else, but, in the end, the Jinchuriki simply turned and went back to his home. "All right then," IG announced to the people in his mind. "Let's go over the information we have first." "Oh! Faster, Kabuto!" IG called out, as he continued dodging the X-Spy's attacks. "You have the offensive and the mind, but it won't do anything if you can't hit anything," he told the other boy, whose expression didn't so much as twitch. "Man, he's really scared, isn't he?" "I know," that was all that Kabuto said, and IG was surprised he was even talking. "Good, then start trying, will you?" The younger boy pressed instead. It wasn't even him being mean. He meant what he said. Kabuto was doing a good enough attempt at training, but he wasn't giving it his all. "Don't we need to be ready in case something happens?" the Mednin asked, stopping his attempts at hitting IG. The leader of the team stopped too, surprised at the inquiry. "I told you to train and to do your best. If something does happen, then I'll deal with it. The team is here as my backup and in case we need to deal with extra threats. You aren't here to deal with Ataksuki, that's my job," IG explained, making the other boy blink and look at him incredulously. That made him smirk. "What? I was chosen for this mission and was supposed to take it alone. You think I was sent here to fail?" "No, that's not the case. Now, start actually making an effort, will you?" That made Kabuto frown and IG almost wished he could read minds. Almost, because he didn't think he really wanted to know what went on inside the X-Spy's mind. Regardless, what he did want to know was just what he was thinking at the moment. "I see," was the slow response he got. Then, without any further comments, Kabuto charged back at him. This time though, he was actually going all out. "Now, that's what I was waiting for," IG thought to himself, grinning. "That's more like it," he voiced as he continued dodging strikes. You are not having trouble keeping up with healing everyone after training, are you? IG asked, both to check on that information and to keep Kabuto's mind occupied even as he fought. I'm not, the other boy replied curtly but not unkindly. It counts as training too, I guess, he added then. Everything seems to be training with you though. You are starting to get it then. IG nodded. There's always a way to improve oneself. We just have to be smart enough to see it. I see, Kabuto mumbled before smirking. Could I suggest that you fight back? I have a technique I'd like to train while we are at it. The one that helped him heal from wounds, right? IG realized instantly. After all, he'd read through his notes on Kabuto and he'd been told by the boy himself when he was recruited. Guess I'm not the only one that had that idea, he thought, being reminded of when he'd used training his team to grind World Ender. Oh. You are doing great, IG praised, as his eyes half closed. Man, multitasking is great, he thought, highly amused. After all, he was both supervising his team's training and hearing Teiya play music. Maybe it was the fact that he was kind of disconnected from what had been a great hobby of his, but he was certainly happy whenever he could hear some good music. You gotta come here and hear Kij play then, Hakai commented in his mind, just as amused as IG himself felt. Otherwise he might get jealous. Hakai, I swear to God, the Orochimaru hissed. Almost chuckling out loud, IG continued observing his team members sparring. This time though, he'd changed things up a little bit. He'd let Teiya use her Doki to fight Jirobo, Kabuto and Yuki, all at once. The fight was surprisingly even. Maybe it was her new technique that allowed her to increase her summon's power and speed, or maybe it was just that she was that good, but it was still quite shocking to see her contain her three teammates alone. Granted, IG had restrained the three a little bit. He wasn't allowing Jirobo to use his earth release techniques. Kabuto couldn't use his admittedly not quite as strong elemental jutsu. Moreover, Yuki had been deprived of her recently developed elemental passing fang. Not that the last one was a great loss, since it was still a work in progress. Still, holding up with three oversized puppets against three different opponents was actually a great accomplishment. Judging by the glint that IG saw in the girl's eye, she knew it too. That expression alone seemed to make Tamrai, who was also overlooking the whole exercise with him, grimace quite a bit. IG suspected that was because the girl would be insufferable after the whole thing was over. Okay then, let's up the stakes, yeah. He called out loud, making everyone pause. Teiya though, didn't even so much as take the flute off her mouth. Tamrai, you are in. You can use your fan. Teiya, he started adding quickly, seeing the downright furious look that appeared in the redhead's face. You can use genjutsu now. If I see things too much in Teiya's favor, I'll start allowing other things on your side, he said, turning towards the people that had already been part of the spa. Everyone nodded then, starting the upgraded exercise once more. Want an extra 2 pairs of eyes? Hakai asked in his mind, and IG replied by allowing the 2 shards a modicum of control so that they could all see through his eyes. They are good, Kij commented, but his tone was far from happy. But they aren't good enough. As I said, I don't need them to fight Akatsuki, the boy replied. Spare us that, IG Hakai snapped at him, making his eye twitch. We know better, so it's insulting if you even try. I'll have to manage. Nothing that we didn't know, he said, trying to keep his thoughts calm. Continue as you are, Kij said. Hone your team enough and they just might be able to help you, if only a little. You have to increase Kabuto's combat capabilities. Not only speed, but his power. He has some, but he needs much more to stand a chance. He's been focusing too much on espionage, Hakai suggested. Taeya has a lot of potential, especially with you being as knowledgeable on genjutsu as you are. You might even be a better teacher on that front than Orochimaru was, Kij mused. After all, I have a feeling that he didn't put much stock in the art. Before you, the only prominent figure of the art was Atakai, and he had a bloodline limit that helped him with it. Jirobo is actually pretty well-rounded, Hakai took over once again, sounding almost surprised. He just needs more of everything, sadly. Tamrai is smart, but she needs much more on the combat front, Kij pointed out. Good thing that's not what you want her for. She should do as a strategist, if she can keep herself out of harm's way. I'll find a way to work on all that, Ig replied, seeing that the twins had finished talking. After all, there was nothing to say about Yuki. She was even less intended for combat when she was recruited than Tamrai was. Good luck, Hakai said. You'll need it, Kij immediately added. Ig could only smile wryly at that. Oh. That was a terrible idea, Hakai told him as he walked. Although, he sounded more amused than chiding really. Ig was fairly sure that he didn't actually think it was a bad idea as much as it was a somewhat risky one. After all, putting both Tamrai and Taeya in charge of the training while he went and did his own private one could only end in disaster, right? Granted, he hadn't really put them on the same level, since he'd still left Tamrai with the final word, but he'd made it clear that they were supposed to work together. He was very curious about how that would go. He'd secretly left a clone watching, just to make sure they didn't kill each other. Both girls had a good head on their shoulders though, so he had faith that they would work with each other, even if they hated it. If they could manage that, then they could make the team a force to be reckoned with, and that without even needing him to be with them. That was the important part, since he wouldn't be able to help or lead them much if he was otherwise occupied with Ataksuki. This was as good a time as any to try that approach. It also aligned well with his need to train his last original jutsu. Now he just needed to get to the training grounds he'd been told to use if he needed to be a little more destructive. Sata, a voice called from his side, and his hand was already on New Ivory's grip before he even thought about it. Seeing who had spoken, he relaxed ever so slightly. Good to see you are on guard. Princess, what a surprise, he said, nodding towards Kurotsuchi. Something I can do for you? Yes. Grandfather sent me to get you, she replied, nodding her head for him to follow, which he did. Something about your new teammates, she continued as they started their way towards the Sushikij's building. Could have had better timing, couldn't you? He thought, even if he wasn't truly annoyed. He didn't sound happy, by the way. Does he ever? Ig asked, earning a snort from the girl. He meant that question though. Onaki had never seemed particularly happy or even calm whenever he'd seen the man. Then again, they usually saw each other for less than desirable situations. Sometimes, Kurotsuchi replied after a moment that she probably used to contain her amusement. From there, they continued walking in silence. I heard you've been training your team. I have, he replied, unsure of where she was going. A corner of his mind told him that she could be one of Sasori's puppets. It was a possibility, he supposed. It was also something that he was aware of with anyone he met, but he had to rein in that paranoia a little bit. Could I? She stopped herself, biting her lower lip in hesitation. Ig, meanwhile, simply continued walking as he looked at her. He knew what she wanted to ask, of course, but he was still rather curious if she would actually go through with it. Could you train me too? It's up to your grandfather, really, he answered almost instantly. I don't mind, but if anything happens, my team and I are in the middle of the whole thing. I doubt that's a place the Sushikage wants you to be close to, princess. The girl growled, but didn't say anything else. She knew he was right, after all. Now, that would be interesting though, if Onaki allowed it. The thought was anything but funny, especially considering the pressure that would be put on him. Furthermore, he rather doubted the Sushikage would be pleased when Kurotsuchi asked the question either. Guess we'll find out soon, he thought as the two of them walked through the door. Once inside though, Ig could only blink, surprised. Shocked, more like. What the fuck? He exclaimed in his mind. Well, that's a surprise, Hakai commented, sounding barely more composed than Ig felt. I'll admit, the boy voiced, barely keeping his wits at the revelation he'd just been on the receiving end of. When I asked her to see if he could send someone to help with my mission, I wasn't expecting you. So, this wasn't you trying to make me angry? Onaki asked, sounding rather displeased. Which Ig thought was fair, even if he could do without that. Oh, I'll have words with him the next time we see each other, the old man threatened. The boy, meanwhile, simply sighed. This isn't gonna be a problem for me, right? He asked hesitantly, almost wincing when the Sushikage's eyebrow twitched. You are aware that between you and her, I won't be able to keep your team here for long, yes? Onaki questioned, making Ig stand straight and nod. The boy's mind worked a mile a minute, trying to come up with a way to finish their mission if Ataksuki didn't make a move before that time came. Good, get out of here. I guess it's not a good time to ask if he can train me. Kurotsuchi asked, and Ig had to stop himself from cursing out loud. Couldn't you pick a better time for this? His eyes almost refused to look at the Sushikage, but they did. The old man looked one breath away from exploding but, visibly trying to calm himself down. And why would I allow that? I could have any jounin in our village teach you, Kurotsuchi Onaki asked, which was fair, really. Why did she want me to teach her? Because none of them rose nearly as fast as the weaver, did they? I want to see if he can teach me, make me rise just like he is doing, the girl explained, standing straight and showing absolutely no hesitation. For a long moment, the room remained silent. Ig used that time to ponder how his life had become what it did. He was also wondering what his chances were if he tried to run away from Onaki. Next to zero. Thanks, Kage. I'll allow it. Say what? Ig couldn't stop himself from blurting out. Did I hear that right? He thought, looking at the man incredulously. The Sushikage looked far from happy, but he also didn't look like he absolutely hated the idea. What the? Thanks, Grandfather, Kurotsuchi said, beaming at the old man. Oh, it's one of those situations, huh? Ig realized, looking between the two of them. Reminds us of other people, right, Kage? Shush, he hasn't realized yet the Shard of Orochimaru scolded his counterpart. The fuck are you talking about? Ig asked, receiving only silence before Sachigumo broke it with a bark. This is why you are my favorite, Sachi, he praised, receiving a wave of warmth from the beast. You just need someone from Kiri now, Kage commented, completely ignoring the previous question, making the boy's eye twitch. Not helping. Well, I'm Ig Sata, leader of the team you are now part of. I hope we can work together, was what Ig said out loud, shoulders slumping down as he looked at his new student and his new teammate. Yujitoni, the woman who had started the whole situation, said, taking the hand he'd offered her. Jinchuriki of the Two Tails, and I hope for the same. Ending this threat can only be a good thing. She added that last part with a wry smile. If it helps, that's the reason they sent me here. I'm one of the best ninja of the cloud, and I'm one of two that benefits the most out of dealing with these. Akatsuki. That made sense, and IG guessed the reasoning of Kumo's leaders was that she would be the safest with a group that was supposed to actively look for and fight Akatsuki. Much better than leaving her to be ambushed somewhere or otherwise attacked. It was a valid strategy, he supposed, even if he'd never do the same with Naruto. Then again, she was more experienced, stronger and older than the blonde boy, so there was that. Well, I'll just tell you one thing. IG started, standing straight. Slowly, he activated and rose the strength of bloodlust as he stared at her. You'll listen to me or Akatsuki will be the least of your worries. Oh. She raised an amused eyebrow. You realize that I've seen much scarier people, right, kid? You realize that, back in Konoha, someone had to interrogate Orochimaru to get information on Akatsuki, right? He shot right back at her. Everyone in the room seemed to freeze as he spoke. Now, that's more like it. You expect me to believe that? The woman asked, sounding a lot less sure than her words would have one think. I can prove it to you, if you really want me to. IG offered with what his team had deemed as the creepy smile. He still didn't know what was up with that, but if it worked then he'd use it. Indeed, he could almost see her sweating under his gaze. Good. Now, I think we have to get back to work. I have a technique I want to start training with and I don't want to push it back too much, he said, before turning towards Onaki. If we are excused, Sashikage-sama. He asked, as politely as he could manage. Go away, Onaki grumbled, waving them away. IG could relate. He was absolutely done with the whole thing too, honestly. Akatsuki couldn't be dealt with fast enough. So, what are we going to work on first? Kurotsuchi asked once they were outside the building. The girl sounded eager. Why can't I have a normal life? He lamented. Should have walked out of the academy that first day, Hakai commented unhelpfully. I do want to know what the team has been doing to better. Shut up, he all but growled, interrupting Yujito's words. He stopped walking and closed his eyes, taking a deep breath in. He needed to calm himself. Once he looked for it, he could feel Sachigumo start to get restless. Hakai and Kij were probably a second away from telling him so. We were, Kij confirmed. You'll both stay silent until we arrive there, he said, starting to walk once more. When the only response he got was the sound of steps behind him, he almost celebrated out loud. Instead, he started talking once more. Princess, you are at the bottom of the hierarchy here. If anyone else has to do something, then they are free to ignore you. You are only here to train and everyone else is here to work, so you aren't a priority, is that clear? But Sashikage-sama said that he'd allow me to train you. Not that he was ordering it or that I had to. That means I have no obligation to train you, he interrupted curtly, leaving no room to doubt that he'd very much like to not do this. He was doing so because it would be insulting to dismiss her outright, but if she gave him or Onaki half a reason, IG was sure that the old man would take it. I understand, the girl growled. Good, he nodded. Yujito. Or do I have to call you Ni? Yujito is fine, the Kumonin replied, sounding like she really didn't care. Yujito. I'll have to see what you can really do. I have some idea. From invasion he felt her flinch at that through web sense, but he carried on. But I hardly think that was your full skill set, so I need to know all that you can do. Understood, Yujito replied, nodding and sporting a serious expression. That was good. The last thing IG needed was someone that actually didn't work with him. He could barely stand Taeya, and she never really went against him despite her attitude. I really should have been a civilian, he lamented with a defeated expression. He willfully ignored the snorts that came from behind him. Are you sure about this? Yujito asked, looking rather uncomfortable where she stood, contrary to the confident demeanor she'd displayed ever since IG first saw her. It was something, he guessed. Oh, these bitches have absolutely no idea the hell they are in for, he heard Taeya comment before starting to cackle like a madwoman. IG had to admit, it was rather amusing. I'm an A-ranked kunoichi, you know that, right? The Kumonin informed him, and he just raised an eyebrow. Kurotsuchi, next to her, remained silent, but she looked like she would rather Yujito win this argument. Unfortunately for both of them, he was far from worried. You'll both spar with me. If you don't, Yujito, I'll put you at the lowest rank inside the team. If you don't, Kurotsuchi, I can't train you because I won't even know what I'm working with, he told them flatly, because he'd rather use his time for something productive. Everyone ready? He asked his mind companions. Of course, Kij replied instantly with a scoff. We are, IG Hakai said, much more calm than his counterpart. Sachigumo barked enthusiastically, happy that she'd probably get a chance to participate. Meanwhile, on the other side of the clearing, his words had lit a fire under both kunoichi. They straightened their backs once they heard him, and they mimicked each other as they lowered their stances, narrowing their eyes at him. It was almost funny, seeing two people so different react the exact same way. The challenge had been issued though. Now it was time to see what his new team member could do. 1, 2, he started counting, twirling new ivory in his right hand, keeping his stance lax but still ready. 3, he finished, and vanished from where he stood at the same time as Yujito did. Kurotsuchi, meanwhile, waved his arms around her. The ground at the Iwanin's feet shifted, suddenly burning bright red as the molten stone rose to protect her. Meanwhile, Yujito became a blur, which would have been more impressive if she could zero in on IG. The boy himself, however, had long since left the place they had last seen him. 3 lightning flickers saw him standing right beside a dashing Jinchuriki before his foot kicked her side. He also kicked her right towards Kurotsuchi, an indirect attack as it were. Just for the Iwanin's knowledge though, he threw new ivory so that it pierced a hole right through her defense. She had to know there were things that not even lava would stop. With both his opponents momentarily distracted, he rushed through hand seals to activate World Ender. With it on and Sachigumo giving him just the amount of chakra he needed to power it, he pulled on new ivory's string to bring it back to him. How about we have some fun, eh, Sachi? He asked, and immediately he felt a rush of emotions wash over him. Excitement, determination, predatory glee. Good to see you are on board, girl, he added, his smile turning into his creepy smile as Taeya would say. Moreover, he was pretty sure she commented something from where the rest of the team stood, looking at the spa. With his young partner agreeing, there was nothing stopping IG. Sacred flock, he called mentally, and lightning came to life behind him. Birds of cackling light took shape before starting to fly towards his opponents. Both Kunoichi seemed to realize now that they should be the ones worried about this fight instead of him. Yujito tried swatting away one of the birds with a chakra-cloaked hand. That was the wrong choice to make, however. Baijua chakra or not, his birds stung. Killer Bee might have been able to shrug them off, but even he had shown that the things affected him, if only the smallest bit. Yujito was no Killer Bee though. It's an S-ranked technique for a reason, IG thought with a grin. An S-ranked distraction too, he added, seeing how both of his opponents seemed to focus on the lightning constructs. Yujito, to her credit, kept an eye on him, which allowed her to block New Ivory with her now very long and chakra-cloaked nails. All's fine, IG thought to himself, as he traded blows with the Jinchuriki. It was all going according to plan, after all. God, that sounds so villainous, he mused wryly. I'm sure you would make a great villain, IG Kij commented, and the boy could hear the mirth in his tone. We can help with that, if you want. Thanks, but no thanks. Sachi is too pure. I couldn't corrupt her like that, he replied, sending a point-blank electromagnetic murder towards Yujito, who dodged, unaware that the attack was also in line with her partner. I'm sure Kij doesn't want that either, Hakai pointed out, barely containing a chuckle from the sounds of it. Will you shut up about that for once? Are you distracted? Yujito asked, indignant. To be fair, his eyes had unfocused a little while he talked with his advisors. However, he hadn't actually started ignoring her. After all, he didn't need his eyes with web sense active. She didn't know that though, which was why she was suddenly enraged. She started attacking much more aggressively then, but it was already too late for her. Poor Kurotsuchi was still barely blocking the sacred flock with her lava release. Yujito, for her part, seemed to hold her ground by dodging and still found time to attack him, which was rather impressive. Her attention was too divided because of that though. Slowly, where the Jinchuriki had been irate, she started getting desperate. The change happened when she finally noticed that for all her attacks, things still looked much the same. The slashes that she got in through his defenses did absolutely nothing, world ender erasing any effect that they might have had to turn things in her favor. Eventually, his plan started, neither of the two noticing how ninja wire had crept its way under them on the ground. In about a second, both of them were wrapped in the steel threads as electricity coursed through them. Both women sized up. Those lightning manipulation levels are showing, IG thought, between New Ivory's thread and that, even the Jinchuriki was contained. And that's that, he announced, clapping his hands as if to clean them of dust. New Ivory's wire pulling on the sword itself and getting it in its place behind him. A second later, the threads let go of both women, who groaned loudly in Kurotsuchi's place. I couldn't do anything, the I-1 voiced, clearly frustrated. Well, what are you, a genin? Did the Sushikage make you a tune-in already, princess? He asked, walking around them as he considered what he'd seen during the fight, what he'd learned from both of them. He'd have to have a few more spars though, try different approaches and see what they did then. He made me tune in, Kurotsuchi answered through her teeth as she dusted her clothes. You are supposed to be around my level. Who said that? He shot back, amused. It wasn't that he was trying to mock her or sound full of himself, it really wasn't. However, IG hadn't been at her level even during the tune-in exams, he was pretty sure. We were both in the tune-in exams together, did you forget? She growled. And everyone there was at the same level? He asked with a raised eyebrow. Did you come here to be trained by someone at your level? He continued, this time with a tilt of his head. Did you think just anyone would be given a mission to? Okay, I get it, Kurotsuchi ground out. Good, he nodded. I don't need to try to convince you that I'm good. If you want training, that's what you'll get, but don't get prissy with me, princess. He rolled his eyes when the girl huffed and turned away. So, what's your assessment? Yujito asked professionally, looking almost like she hadn't just gotten her ass kicked. She was taking the loss much better than the princess, that was for sure. My assessment is that you are pretty good, I gotta say, Ig told her, regarding her once more, his eyes finding places where new ivory had cut through her outfit. None of the scratches were too big, which spoke of how well she'd covered herself. Also, good call not having your friend help you out, he added, drawing a slight smile from her and a confused frown from everyone else. It seemed that not everyone knew who and what she was. He'd have to solve that real soon. The princess could be kept out though. Anyway, I'll wait for you to fully recover and then we'll spar again. I want to test you further. Get a good measure of what you two can do, what I'm working with and what to improve in, Ig mused, turning and starting to walk towards his team. Excuse me. Improve? Yujito asked, confused, as she started walking slightly behind him. You are part of this team now, so that means you'll train with us. We have a lot of downtime while we try to discover how Ataksuki is trying to get to Han, and that means we have a lot of time to use to get better. What, you thought we would only sit tight and wait for them? I have better things to do than just be on guard duty, Ig explained to her with a bored tone. I was sent here to. You were sent here to be on my team, he interrupted the cloud ninja as he turned and stared at her. I don't know what they told you, but I'm in charge of this mission and the only reason you are here is because I decided to give her and your village a chance to prove that you aren't an enemy. You'll do as I say and do it well, that's all you need to know. Maybe he'd snapped a little too easy, but Ig couldn't let her destroy the already shaky foundation of his team. He needed all of them to work together and to the best of their abilities. If anything went wrong, it could be the end for, well, everything and everyone. So, he would stamp the idea out of her head if he had to, because there would be no talking back to him. Ig was the one with all the information about their enemy. It was probable that nobody knew as much about the Ataksuki members as he did, not even the other Ataksuki members. Ig, you should hack, I started, but Ig almost ignored him. He almost asked Sachi to help him terrorize Yujito. Then, he took a deep breath. Calm, he thought to himself, and, to a lesser extent, Sachigumo. He heard her whine something, clearly just as tempted to lash out as him. Maybe he wasn't keeping as good a grip on his emotions as he thought. Or maybe she isn't, Kij suggested, and Ig almost frowned. She is a chakra beast, after all. She might be naive and adorable, the boy's lips twitched at that, but decided not to point out that choice of words to the Orochimaru shard. But she's proven that she can be ruthless with the animal constructs. That was true enough, he supposed. Maybe he'd have to spend some more time with her, try to curb those tendencies. It would eat at his training time, but this was something that he couldn't ignore. If Sachigumo went out of control, it would be a disaster. The beast whined, this time full of regret and sadness. Everything's fine, girl, Ig told her. Just means we can spend more time together. Was I clear? He asked, focusing back to the present, where Yujito was looking at him nervously. Damn, really laying down the law, ha, creepy eyes. Taeya unhelpfully commented. I don't think we've been training you in close combat enough, Taeya. You won't always be able to hide behind your summons or someone else, IG replied as he turned towards his team. The aforementioned Sound Nin gulped and paled at the prospect. Anyone else wants to offer a comment? When they all replied in the negative, he nodded. Good, he said before sighing and closing his eyes. God, I hate this mission. Oh. So, what's the secret here, IG? Tamrai asked him with narrowed eyes once he'd sent Kurotsuchi away. Evidently, she noticed something in the way he treated Yujito while he examined her and the princess. That was actually good, since that was kind of what he expected from her. Yujito is the Jinchuriki of the two tails, he replied bluntly, carefully keeping tabs on how everyone reacted. Kabuto didn't react at all, which meant that he already knew. Unsurprising, considering that he'd dealt with information before. Teiya and Jirobo, for their part, tensed up, eyes darting towards the blonde woman that stood just as casually as before. Tamrai, for her part, paled, terror flashing through her expression before she could control herself. She's also here to stay, so you better deal with it, he added, mostly to the Sand Kunoichi. She's a Kumo Jinchuriki, so she's as stable as one of them can get. You make it sound like we still aren't stable, the woman in question pointed out, and IG just stared at her. None of the Jinchuriki I've met seem to be very stable, honestly, he replied with a shrug. After all, there was Naruto, who he loved to death, but also had to admit wasn't a perfect picture of a sane person. There was Killer Bee, who while he hadn't exactly displayed his eccentric ways much during their battle, he already knew of them and had seen glimpses of them. Then there was Han, who spent most of his day meditating to keep a semblance and barely interacted with anyone. I'll withhold judgment for even you guys. Yujito seemed to be somewhat normal so far, but a day of spars and little else was hardly enough to make a decision on that front. For a single second though, it looked like she wanted to defend herself. Then she closed her mouth and a conflicted expression took over her face. Fair, she conceded, likely remembering Killer Bee. Anyway, I want no problems on this front and I will smack you if you make a fuss for no reason whatsoever, am I clear? He asked, raising an eyebrow at the lot of them. After all of them nodded, some slower than others. Good. Jirobo, don't use your chakra absorption technique on her. There's a good chance that won't end well for you. The boy nodded, and suddenly looked nervous. It seemed that the problem had not occurred to him before IG pointed it out. It was a good thing he did. Last thing he wanted was to have someone in his team out of commission because of a spar accident. Okay, training time, IG announced with a clap. But after all your spars, Tamrai started, only to be silenced by a raised hand from the boy. I'm perfectly fine and she's a Jinchuriki, she can probably go weeks without sleeping and training non-stop. She'll be fine, he explained, making the older blonde woman grimace. Please don't do that. Good to know that you know I can do that. I won't though. I'm not a monster, he reassured, dutifully ignoring the raised eyebrows of everyone else around them. All of you, sit on the ground, legs crossed and eyes closed, he ordered. A satisfied smirk formed on his face when they immediately did as they were told. Now, I want you to ignore everything else around you, focus on the chakra running through your body and nothing else. You'll be doing that until I tell you to stop or something happens. Something? Tamrai asked, not even opening her eyes. Something, he replied without explaining further. That sounds like training I had to do, Yujito commented when he led her away from the team. I'm not surprised, was all he said. Now, you and I are gonna spar for as long as we can, which will be a while. There's no surrender or defeat here. I want you to go until you can't anymore or until I'm satisfied. No matter the situation. Am I clear? Crystal, she nodded, blinking. Her expression remained as it was, but suddenly IG noticed there was an air of seriousness around her. Interesting, he mused. Subtle signs of emotion. I can work with that, he decided. Then he charged. Oh. Onaki. What an absolute mess, he thought to himself as he saw his granddaughter leave. His eyes followed her until they couldn't anymore before locking on IG Sata, the weaver. He almost wanted to blame him for all of this, but he knew that was just his anger latching on the closest target. Letting my granddaughter train with a leaf nin, who would have thought? He wondered with a wry smile. In all honesty though, he didn't much care for that, really. It was actually very low on his list of priorities, even if it wouldn't be the case for others in his village. He would go as far as saying he was quite happy with that arrangement. Kurotsuchi would be trained by what he was sure would be one of the greatest shinobi of her generation. Not only that, but Onaki had been keeping an eye on the boy and his team since they arrived. His training was effective, if nothing else. The problem though, came from the fact that said boy was living practically next to their Jinchuriki and now another village's Jinchuriki. Which was also fine even if it worried Onaki. What wasn't fine was that the Jinchuriki were being targeted by a very powerful organization, and that meant that having Kurotsuchi with Sata was putting her in danger. Not only that, but there was also the fact that there was another village's Jinchuriki in Iwagakure. I'm so gonna smack her around next time I see him, Onako thought, barely withholding a snarl. The man might not be Reikage anymore, after the mind control incident he went through, but the Sushikage was sure that he still held a lot of control over what went on in his village. Furthermore, he was sure that he was behind this, whatever this was. Finish this mission quickly, Weaver Onaki thought. For both our sakes. What was the world coming to, when he empathized with a leaf ninja? He amused himself for a moment thinking what his advisors and the council would have to say on that matter. However, it was short-lived. After all, Onaki was the one that would have to keep them in line, and he was already doing that for Sata. These recent developments had only made things that much worse. The Sushikage could only hope that Sata would finish the mission before he had to kick them all out of his village. Otherwise not only would he have dealt with all the trouble for nothing, but chances were that Ataksuki would get their hands on their remaining Jinchuriki. Onaki was sure the council would find a way to spin it so that it was his fault, never mind the fact that he had brought this team here to keep them safe. They were getting more and more bold as time passed, and he also knew why. He was old, too old at that. He should have retired a while ago, he would freely admit. The only reason that the council tolerated his stay was because of his bloodline selection. Still, they wanted him out of the position. They didn't much care about who took the post after him, just that it wasn't him. In a way, it was understandable, since the more time passed, the less reliable he would be. Foreign powers would be less and less intimidated by him, and that would make his authority wane too. He knew it too, but he couldn't make just anyone Sushikage. Kurotsuchi would be his successor, and that was that. Onaki had yet to find a better suited person, and if he was honest, he had stopped looking. She had the power and the mind for it. She only needed to develop both to an acceptable level, but that was a question of time. Maybe not even that much time, he mused as he continued looking over Sata's team. Half the time, Onaki didn't know what the Weaver was doing with his squad, if he was honest. Like at that moment, as he looked at them. Meditating. It wasn't that he had anything against the practice, but at that very moment it seemed like the last thing they should be doing. They were though, and the Sushikage couldn't help but be curious about what it was for. It actually interested him almost as much as the spar that Sata was having with the two-tails Jinchuriki. Almost. As he watched the boy battle one of the strongest ninja that the nations could find, Onaki could only be glad that, for the moment, that was someone on his side. Iwa didn't have an abundance of strong shinobi, he would never admit. Right at that moment, the most prominent ninja they had available were Onaki himself and the Jinchuriki. The loss of one of the latest had almost crippled them. The Sushikage really hoped Ataksuki would be dealt with soon. He didn't want to have to face them by himself, that was for sure, but on top of that he also couldn't be seen depending on foreign powers for too long. Everyone would realize his situation if that happened. Suna and Kiri were weak at the moment and Kumo was being watched closely by basically everyone, which allowed some playing room. It was never a good moment to show weakness, however, so Onaki would prefer to not have to. Now what, Weaver? The Sushikage thought as he saw the boy leave the training grounds after ending the spa. Initially, the village leader had only gone to see how things went for his granddaughter. Thankfully, Sata had made all the right calls, even if Onaki could have done without Kurotsuchi being talked like that. Now, however, he was curious. He wanted to know more about this boy that had risen so fast in the world. He wanted to know more about the man he was allowing to teach his granddaughter and successor. He wanted to know more about Ig Sata. So, he followed the boy as he made his way towards another training grounds. The ones he'd asked for specially for himself. The only explanation he'd given was that he needed to practice with a more destructive technique that had a bigger area of effect than normal. He doubted the precaution was necessary, but Onaki had still given the boy the place he used to train himself. If he managed to guarantee the need of using such a place, he wasn't sure how he would take that. Still, he followed, intent in seeing what the boy could possibly need the training grounds for. Onaki knew pretty much all that the boy could do. He'd seen some of it himself. However, nothing in his file pointed to having a technique that caused a lot of destruction. The sacred flock he'd used against B and now here to test Kurotsuchi and the Jinchuriki was impressive, and Onaki was sure he'd pulled his punches, because a technique that dangerous was far out of his granddaughter's league. What madness have you created now, Ig Sata? The Sushikage asked himself, watching as the boy visibly concentrated once he reached the center of the training grounds. The old man remembered then, the day he'd first witnessed why the boy was a person to keep an eye on at all times. The day he saw such a young ninja completely break one of the best spies he'd ever seen like it was the easiest thing in the world. Onaki had no doubts that Genjutsu was the reason the Weaver trusted his team so readily. A team that the Sushikage would have never allowed otherwise. Ex-Sound Ninja and a Sand Kunoichi of all people. He was sure Sata had placed at least the formers under his cursed creation at least once. It spoke for itself, really, the fact that he could put together such a group and they followed his every order without a single word of doubt or rebellion. Then Onaki saw it, Sata practicing a new technique of his. Lightning flashed and the village leader could only watch, readying his own technique to protect himself in case he needed it. As he watched the whole thing unfold though, the Sushikage couldn't help but take note of one fact. Because, after witnessing such a thing, he could only decide one thing and one thing only. His village wouldn't go to war against Konoha, not if he had a say in the matter. Damn you, Hiruzen, he couldn't help but think as he continued watching. How does your village continue producing monsters like this one? Ig could almost feel Hakai and Kij telling him we told you so when he got back to them. After all, they'd been dropping hints that he was working too much and worrying too much since they arrived in Iowa. They'd agreed with him that it was necessary, but the two of them also agreed with each other that he still needed to rest even if less than normal. Point was, he was enjoying his time in the mindscape, which worked very well for him, since this was something that had to be done anyway. Two birds with one stone, as it were. The fact that Sachi was bombarding him with her innocent joy was a big plus too, obviously. As for what exactly he was doing, well, he was spending some time with the eight-limbed wolf that resided in him. Ig had, after all, noticed that the chakra beast had been getting a little antsy. Evidently, Kij and Hakai, together with his mostly calm mind, weren't enough to keep her from getting restless. Thus, he'd decided to spend some one-on-one time with Sachigumo running through the forests in the training grounds. Evidently, it worked wonders, if the feelings he received from here were anything to go by. It was also helping his mood, which was great too. He hadn't even noticed how wound up he'd been feeling as of late. This brings me back, Ig thought, reminiscing of the times when he would free run his way through the village or make his way through the forest of death. It wasn't even that long ago, but to him it felt like a lifetime. How long had he been jumping from one problem to the other? When had everything started being all about fights and missions? Thank you, girl, he told Sachigumo when they took a little break. Not because they were tired, since they literally couldn't be, but because constantly running wasn't fun. Besides, the oversized wolf seemed to enjoy being pet about as much as running, so it worked just as well. You can just call for me if you want to do this more often, yeah. So long as we aren't about to or in the middle of a fight, it should be fine. Or you can ask Kij or Hakai, if you don't feel it's a good moment, he told her. She barked and he got a sense of affirmation, but Ig wondered if she had understood all that he said. Her level of intelligence was weird. It seemed to oscillate between toddler and prepubescent. Sometimes one had to slowly explain things to her and others she would understand everything immediately. Regardless, she was a dear, and Ig liked her just the way she was. It was refreshing, in a way, to have such a pure soul in a world so messed up. It was also sad, because Ig knew it was only a question of time before she was tainted too. I'm fine, Sachi, he said when the beast whined a question at him. He'd let his thoughts get away from him again. Just thinking about how wonderful you are, he added, smiling at her. A grin that got wider when she sent him her own happiness and pride. He had to wonder, how would he be, if he didn't have Sachigumo? What would be different? What would be different if he didn't have Kij or Hakai for that matter? He guessed it was a question much like how it would be if he didn't have his friends. One that he didn't even want an answer for, didn't need one. One that I don't want to ask myself, he decided. What's the matter? It was his turn to question, seeing as the chakra beast went silent, staring at him. It was one of those rare moments when she seemed to be much smarter than normal. Her 8 blue eyes stared at him as if trying to pry knowledge from him. Which, considering who she was, might even be literal. Then she stomped, sending him what she wanted to say without needing words or even signs. Ig blinked. Then he blinked again. Of course, Sachi, he replied, smiling at her. He was surprised, shocked even. He was also very confused, he would admit. However, this wasn't a bad thing, he supposed. Strange, that was for sure, but then again, when had his life ever been normal since he had come to be in this world? Say, how about we go visit Hakai and Kij, yeah? He asked, and he almost sighed in relief when he felt her agree instantly. Thus, the two of them rushed out of the training grounds. Soon enough, they found the two Orochimaru lookalikes. Then, IG wasted no time in throwing Kij under the bus with Sachi while he got Hakai alone to talk. What, exactly, have you two been talking about with Sachi? IG hissed at him. The shite-eating grin his creation gave him was all that he needed to know. So, she really brought it up, huh? Kij asked from behind him. Turning, the boy saw the Orochimaru shard with a hand between Sachigumo's ears. Ige's eye twitched. So. Congratulations, Hakai took over for his counterpart. It's a girl, Kij finished. Poor Sachigumo, supremely confused, sent a question his way. Ige's mind, however, was still reeling from what she had previously asked him at the training grounds. Are you my dad? He'd replied in the affirmative, of course. What else was he supposed to say? However, what the actual fuck? His eye twitched again when he saw Kij trying to keep his snickering in check and failing. Say, Sachigumo IG started, and both Orochimaru shards suddenly lost their mirth. Evidently, they realized that he was up to no good. Do you know what a brother is? She barked, and IG didn't need his sense to know that she was telling him yes. You know, I basically made Hakai, he continued, and saw the aforementioned man pale even more than he already was. That'd make them your brother. Then he witnessed firsthand how the chakra beast froze. Her head snapped towards the Orochimaru construct, who gave her a stiff smile. See how you like being blindsided, huh? IG thought vindictively. Well, Dad, Hakai said, and suddenly the boy wasn't so confident anymore. I wanted to bring up something in the future, but I guess this is a good time, since we are all revealing stuff, he continued, giving IG a very strong sense of foreboding. He was right to be wary, he decided as he saw Hakai's body change once more, this time to a female version of Orochimaru. Isn't that one of the bodies he took possession of? He wondered. I like this body better. Huh, the boy said intelligently. Well, it doesn't look bad. He saw both Hakai and Kij blink at that. Had they expected him to freak out or something? It was strange, seeing Hakai like that, but it wasn't the weirdest thing in the world, by far. Anyway, Sachi, he continued, turning towards the wolf that was still vibrating in place, clearly overcome with excitement at the prospect of having a brother. Her head snapped to face him, eyes shining. She was, evidently, waiting for him to tell her something just as good as what he'd already said to her. Wouldn't want to disappoint, yeah. He thought to himself. I'm officially adopting Kij too. Which makes all of you siblings. That did it. A chakra beast went on a rampage of face-licking inside his mindscape. The three of them complained more than once, but they never meant a word. It was a strange situation, weird on many levels. And yet, it still managed to be nice. I know we kind of sprung that on you, Hakai told IG when they got a moment as Sachigumo attacked Kij. But we talked and we were sure you wouldn't mind. If you do though, I'm sure the two of us can. It's fine, IG waved off, still a bit miffed. They had to have meant no harm. Otherwise Hakai would have talked. He knew, because they'd tried to prank him a few times and every time the rules stopped his creation. It was a bit of a shame. Naruto had taught him that pranks could be fun even to the one that was on the receiving end, although that was rare. Besides, I really don't mind. After saying that, he turned to look at the chakra beast with a smile. He really didn't. It would be weird, that's for sure, and he could have done without the surprise, but he was completely okay with that development. The three of you'll forever be the closest people to me. You know all my secrets, all my burdens, he mused out loud, almost feeling Hakai staring at him. IG was sure he'd already talked about this, but he didn't care much. Closer than even my friends. Destinies tied together by more than bonds. Isn't that what true family is about? It's a way to see it, I guess, his creation replied, looking at him oddly. It took the boy a moment to get over how strange the change was, only just noticing that even Hakai's voice had changed. It'll take some time to get used to that, IG mused, taking in the woman's new self. Then he chuckled. Figures that my family would have to be this weird, he commented, earning a snort from Hakai. As far as relaxing attempts went, IG would classify that one as a success, surprises and all. Oh. You seem to be in an odd mood, Kabuto commented, sitting next to him. IG would admit that it surprised him a little. The ex-spy was usually supremely uncomfortable and scared in his presence, which made perfect sense. However, it did mean that actively approaching him was out of the ordinary. I just realized some things, is all he answered without really saying anything. He couldn't very well tell his team that he'd apparently been declared the father of a chakra beast and adopted 2 mind constructs, could he? God, it sounds so weird, he thought to himself. He still wore a smile on his face though. Refocusing on the drawing he was making, he let Teiya's music distract him. It was a fast tune this time, he would even go as far as calling it aggressive. It gave him the feeling of a fight, thrilling but dangerous. What is it you want, Kabuto? IG asked, as he started drawing. The silver-haired boy hadn't moved, after all. I don't know, really. I just... The admission made him pause, his pencil hovering over the paper as the other boy trailed off. Can I ask you a question though? Go ahead, IG replied, giving the ex-spy his full attention. Something told him that this wouldn't be a normal conversation. How do you know who you are? Kabuto asked, his tone almost casual, making him blink. That certainly hadn't been the kind of thing he'd expected. Regardless of that though, he gave the question some thought before answering. Can I ask what brought this on? He said before actually answering. It was an interesting question, if nothing else. I've asked this of everyone that has had me working for them, Kabuto replied with no hesitation whatsoever. IG wondered about that for a moment. Why would he ask that in particular? Was there something that he didn't remember about him? Probably. There wasn't much at all in his notes, least of all from Shippuden. He only had very vague information that didn't matter much, considering that was from a future that wouldn't happen anyway. We are who we are, IG started answering, looking away towards the rock formations around them. They were imposing, but they got old really quick, at least to him. In the end, they looked so dull, compared to how full of life Konoha's forests were. Everything we do makes us who we are. Those things we do because we want to, those things we do because we think we have no choice, even those things we do actually not having a choice. What we do and what we feel, is what we are. Is that so? Kabuto asked, looking like he was hanging on to every word. A thoughtful frown on his face, as if he were using all his brain power to try to process what IG was telling him. I'm IG Sata, he continued. At that point though, he wondered who he was talking to anymore. I like my friends and my family, he added, privately amused. And I hate anything that endangers them. My dream for the future is to be the next god of Shinobi. In the meantime, I like drawing, free running, cooking and spending time with my friends. That's a rather simplistic view, Kabuto commented. Who said that our identities have to be complicated? IG pointed out with a smile. In the end, the only thing that matters is what we want. We can be whoever we want to be, so long as we don't let others' opinion be more important than ours. At that, the ex-spy went silent, which was good. IG had to think about what he'd just said himself. Why? Because he'd meant every single word he'd said. When did I become IG and just IG instead of IG and someone else? What even was my name before? He wondered. Strangely, he was sure that not knowing the answer to that question should have devastated him, but it didn't. Instead, he felt like he lost something, but that it didn't really matter. It was probably written somewhere in his notes, but the fact remained that he'd forgotten. He was IG now though, that was all there was to him. He only had notes and the vaguest of memories of his last life. Considering how much he'd changed already, his knowledge was little more than people's information. No event would remain the same now. My past life might as well be a strange dream, he mused hollowly. You are who you are, wasn't it? Hakai commented then, making him smile. I guess, IG replied with a sad smile. It was still a pity that he'd lost all that part of his life. He now had different things though. It was what it was. Things changed and he had to adapt. Nothing new there, he thought. You've given me something to think about, Kabuto said. Apparently, IG wasn't the only one whose mind had drifted off. Thank you, IG. And with that, the ex-spy left. The fuck? Was the only thing the boy could think. He knew it was a meaningful question, but still. He hadn't expected that. It seems that Kabuto really cared about that answer, Kij commented with a thoughtful hum. For what it's worth, what you said was good. There's a lot of ways to interpret such a thing, so we'll have to hope it was what he was looking for. I guess, IG replied, looking at the back of his teammate. He wondered if that question would change anything. He guessed it wouldn't change how they worked together though, since Kabuto would still be scared of him, but I'll just have to wait and see, he decided, taking a deep breath in and turning back to his drawing. Oh. Today was not what I have been getting used to, IG heard as he looked at a confused Gyrobo petting Yuki. It seemed the dog was interested in being friends with the ex-sound nin, for whatever reason. He wasn't sure what was up there, but she was his partner, so he'd trust her for now, he supposed. Thus, he turned towards Yujito without worrying too much. She'd taken surprisingly well to their training sessions, IG found, which was great. Having a Jinchuriki to train against was amazing for the team. After all, it was much better to prepare them for Akatsuki if they had a stupidly powerful individual to fight against. He'd been filling that spot well enough, but Yujito added the variety that they needed. It wouldn't do if they just got used to fighting him instead of just someone powerful. There was only so much that he could mix up his skill to make different styles. I've found that taking some time to relax is just as useful when training, IG told her, hearing Hakai chuckling on the back of his mind. He almost wanted to roll his eyes at that. So, I try to do that from time to time. I'll admit that this mission has shifted my priorities a little, but we can't work at our 100% if we never take a break. That makes sense, the woman said, nodding as her eyes scanned the surroundings and the team. It's just that I hadn't seen this part yet. Well, You haven't been around for long, IG replied with a shrug. Then a wry smile spread over his face. But that's not what you wanted to talk about, is it? He asked, not even looking at her. He felt her eyes widen the smallest bit through his web sense though. He'd started using it as much as he could, to use it much more than he did before. It worked to improve his awareness and also to prepare for when he had to actively use the sensing part of senjutsu, or so he hoped. You are more perceptive than I thought, she pointed out, avoiding his question altogether. It seemed Yujito had trouble being direct about whatever it was she wanted to talk about. That made IG even more curious, if he was honest. Thus, he didn't say anything, simply letting the silence drag on. He was fine with that, since he was currently enjoying Teiya's music, Yuki's antics and Sachigumo's boundless energy. Yujito, for her part, seemed less so, as she discreetly fidgeted in place. Now we are curious, Hakai commented, sounding like she meant it. Why didn't you kill me? The Jinchuriki asked in the end, catching him off guard for a moment. He didn't even know what she was talking about, if he was honest. I mean, you are my teammate. You were sent here to help me out, he said slowly, trying to find a reason why he should have even considered killing her. Why would I? During the invasion, she ground out, like she was forcing the words out of her mouth. You kicked me away towards that team of genin. Why didn't you kill me instead? You had new ivory, you could have pierced my skull and ended the entire thing right there. One less threat to your people. You'd have even managed to bag the 2 tails for your village, once it reformed. Finally understanding, he smiled wryly. So, she realized that, huh? Wonder how many people noticed and how many know the reasons. You've been holding on to that for a while, huh? He said, turning away. There were lots of reasons not to kill you. Such as? She continued, prodding. Killing you in front of Killer B himself. Do you have any idea what that would have meant for me afterwards? IG asked, his smile growing strained. That'd been a death sentence. And before you say it, going for him instead of you. No way it would have been that easy. Also, him dying would have spelled doom over the nations either way, now that he thought about it. Without him there, how would the invasion have turned out? With no way to break the hold Obito had over A and B, there would have been another World Shinobi War, at the very least, he supposed. Maybe Konoha wouldn't even exist anymore. But that didn't happen, Kage told him curtly, and he realized his mood had taken a turn for the worst really quick. Taking a calming breath in, he shared positive feelings with Sachigumo, which did the same for him. IG didn't know exactly when, but their emotional connection had started being less about helping her and more about helping each other at some point. You said you had more than one reason, Yujito pointed out, and he took a moment to regard her. Was this information that her higher-ups had asked of her? Was it personal curiosity? It seemed to be more than that, from what he was seeing. Was there a story behind this? Why do you want to know anyway? He decided that there was no harm asking directly. Being subtle and cunning was good and all, but he'd done entirely too much thinking regarding Akatsuki. He didn't feel like doing more. It's something that's been on my mind ever since that moment. I haven't even known how to feel about knowing that. I feel even more confused now that I find out you avoided doing it on purpose. I need to know, she replied, with enough emotion that IG thought he could believe her. There was still a possibility that she was acting, of course, but there was no harm in the conversation they were having, he supposed. For what it's worth, we are about as sure as you are, Kij offered. IG would have preferred a more sure reassurance, but he guessed that was too much to ask for. Because I had faith, he said then, with a soft smile as he looked away. Faith? Yujito asked then, and he felt her blink at him, clearly not understanding. Faith in my friends, that they'd contain you long enough for backup to arrive. Faith in my plans that would see help arriving in time. Faith in our villages, that would avoid an all-out war if we avoided meaningful losses, he added, that last part leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He hated saying it. It was him saying that the deaths of that day weren't as important as hers would have been. It was true, but he hated it all the same. You thought there wouldn't be war after an attack like that? Yujito continued prodding. I thought there was a chance of that, and if there's a slight chance that I won't see the people I care about having to participate in a war, I'll take it, he explained to her. You know that a war will most likely happen in their lifetime, right? The nations don't have a good history maintaining peace, she commented, matter-of-factly. You know why we've been in relative peace since the Third Shinobi War? He asked instead of answering her. That seemed to catch her off guard for a moment before she recovered. Because there were too many losses. Considering you are in Iowa, you should. It's been long enough for the villages to recover, he interrupted her, his smiling widening just the smallest bit in amusement. If the nations could come out of a war and almost immediately start another that lasted 8 years, what makes you think they aren't ready for another now, after 15 years of basically no conflict, except for Kiri's civil war? She didn't answer, but IG could tell that she was just waiting for him to continue. She probably had a few ideas. He'd be disappointed if she didn't, really. When the Third Shinobi War ended, Konoha was too great a power with the Yellow Flash at our disposal. Even when the Kyuubi attack happened and we lost our Hokage, the other villages saw how a tailed beast went on a rampage in the middle of the village and we remained standing. Suna was too weak, Kiri was fighting itself, and Iwa and Kumo couldn't move because that had opened the door for the other to do something. Do you see the pattern there? Fear, Yujito concluded with an expression that gave away nothing. Indeed. The nations may not want peace, but they fear war too much, IG said, his smile still in place, and he could tell that disturbed the Cloud Jinchuriki. So, peace isn't impossible. Sooner or later, something will change in this balance you just said. It's already changing. The bloody mist's time is over. Konoha is flourishing once more. The invasion has caused ripples that haven't disappeared yet, she commented, and IG wondered if she was revealing something without knowing or just telling him her honest opinion. Someone will stop being afraid at some point, Yujito pointed out. He let out a chuckle at that, clearly surprising her. Not everyone's absolutely mad like you, IG Hakai pointed out, and he had to agree with that. If it'll keep the people I care about safe, he started, turning to stare into the Jinchuriki's eyes, smile still in place. I'll do my absolute best to be everyone's reason to keep the peace. She frowned as she looked over her notes. Balance breaker, the genjutsu she'd worked up to increase her teammates' capabilities, was problematic. It worked well enough, but after some time working on it, no one in the team was used to it yet, and the progress was so slow that she was half tempted to see if a good smack would help them along. It was a shame IG didn't approve of that plan, really. Teiya guessed that part of the problem was that she hadn't been able to place herself under the genjutsu, which would have given her a better insight. That had led to her approaching their leader for some help. She had basically taken classes from him already. What was some more help, right? He'd looked happy with that, so that was good. Thus, she had placed the genjutsu on him and he'd given her his thoughts on the matter, in writing even, which allowed her to go over the information even when he was otherwise occupied. Like right that moment, when he'd taken his dog for a walk, apparently. He'd given them some bullshit training excuse, but Taeya was almost sure they were doing anything but. Not that she'd say that to Iji's face. She was a lot of things, but stupid wasn't one of them. Anyway, apparently the problem wasn't so much with what the genjutsu did to people, but an unintentional side effect. Apparently, the way she'd tailored it, it felt pretty damn weird for the targets. That was the short of it, at least from what she gathered of Iji's words. Now, how was she to tweak that out of the technique? That was the fucking question, wasn't it? Her team leader had offered to help her iron out that detail, but she'd refused. This was a technique that she'd made herself, after all. Granted, Iji had taught her a lot and almost coached her through the whole process, but she'd been the one to work it out in the end. She wanted this to be hers and she would make it so, damn it. To think there would come a day I would care about making my shitty teammates feel better, she thought, amused. It wasn't quite as it sounded, but it was ultimately true, and she found the idea quite humorous. She also found herself, as it was becoming usual, comparing the two people that had guided her through her ninja career. In a fraction of the time that Orochimaru had, Iji had completely overthrown him as the best to follow. Not only were the punishments much lighter, but it was also much more productive. Also, he encouraged them to work together. Normally, Taeya would have laughed at that, but she sure appreciated it when she was the one that was being helped. So, she guessed she could help out everyone else a bit too. Wouldn't want everyone to decide to leave her out, that's for sure. Everyone was progressing by leaps and bounds, even if some showed it more than others. Windbitch and the Fatus had barely changed anything in their skill set. Hell, even the Four Eyes hadn't worked on anything too new. However, they were definitely much better than when they had started. Taeya felt no small measure of pride in the fact that she was the only one to add something new to their repertoire. Well, she and the dog, but adding that made it sound so much less impressive, so she wouldn't if she didn't have to. Yuki didn't even count anyway, she was with Iji all the time and he'd been the one to help her add that. She conveniently ignored the fact that he'd helped her too. Now, how do I fucking do this? She grumbled to herself, focusing back on her notes. Oh. Gyrobo. Now, how do I fucking do this? He thought with a growl. It was one of the now regular spars between teammates. This time, it was an all-out fight versus Yujito, the Two-Tails Jinchuriki. He'd have called Iji mad, if he weren't so afraid of telling him that to his face, or even behind his back. Gyrobo had avoided the boy's ire so far and he wanted to keep it that way, if at all possible. The new teammates sure made them feel inadequate. How were they supposed to measure up to someone that had a literal chakra beast inside them? Taeya and him couldn't even use their cursed marks unless they got good enough for Iji's standards on his mind training. At least there were no limits to what they could do in these fights. None but taking away his chakra-absorbing technique, that is. That was a shame, but he didn't want to find out what happened if he used it to absorb that chakra. So, that was a limitation that he was all too glad to have, that's for sure. It didn't make fights any easier though. No matter what plan Tamrai or Taeya came up with, no matter how fast or precise Kabuto was, no matter how much lava Kurotsuchi threw at her, no matter how strong his hits or jutsu were, Yujito just kept going. It felt like trying to stop a river by throwing a pebble in the middle of it. Useless, pointless, laughable. Faster, Kabuto Ig called from the sidelines, his red eyes staring intently at them as they fought, looking for weaknesses to work out, things to improve, holes in their strategy, everything. It was a little unnerving, Gyrobo would admit. Move, Teiya, if you just stand there, then you are the first to go, and that's the worst thing that could happen. Thank God that Yujito didn't think of going after you, right? The boy added, almost mockingly. Evidently, both women heard him loud and clear, because at once both acted. Thus, Teiya jumped away at the same time that a clawed hand was brought down exactly where she'd been standing. Before the Kumonin could try again, Gyrobo interrupted her with a rock to the face courtesy of one of his earth release techniques. If they lost Teiya's genjutsu, they might as well just give up. It was the only thing giving them the slightest of chances in this spa. Time your wind right, Tumrai. Unless it's on purpose, if you hit both the enemy and your allies, then it's useless, the boy called out then. Although, Gyrobo had to wonder if it hadn't been on purpose. Ig was likely to be thinking the same thing. After all, the Sand Kunoichi had hit both Yujito and Teiya, someone that she just didn't get along with, to put it mildly. Gyrobo ignored them though, in favor of colliding with the Jinchuriki and getting her on a hold. It was a bad idea, he knew, after all. Yeah, that he thought, grimacing and hissing as blue flames coated the woman, burning him to make him let her go. He didn't though. After all, the whole point was to buy his team some time. Well, are you going to just stand there, Kabuto? Ig called then, and sure enough, the silver-haired ninja appeared where the two of them were wrestling each other. Interestingly, he didn't go for Yujito. Instead, the medic /spy placed his hands on Gyrobo's back. Instantly, he felt the effects of the fire subsiding. It was an unexpected approach, but a good one. Now they only needed to. Good, so you can do something, huh, princess? Their leader said, sounding like he was commenting on the weather instead of mocking the granddaughter of the Sushikage. Their team leader was fearless, he decided. Justifiably so if anyone asked Gyrobo. He'd seen enough of the guy to know that you had to really mean business to even try to get on his bad side. Maybe it was different for Kages, but so far Gyrobo hadn't seen proof of that. Back to the fight though, Kurotsuchi's attack had hit Jinchuriki's legs. Close enough for Gyrobo to be worried about friendly fire. However, he could see what the girl was trying. Thus he twisted his own body out of the way and sure enough, more lava fell on the woman's limbs, wrapping around them and fixing them to the floor once it started cooling. There was a slight breeze that helped that along, and he was quite sure that was Tumrai's doing. Both Kabuto and Gyrobo got away then, just in time to see more lava rain on Yujito as she struggled against the material that bound her to the ground. She didn't get out soon enough though. Then, when she was firmly in place, the breeze turned into a hurricane. Teiya was obviously boosting Tumrai because she even broke the obsidian, sending the woman flying against a rock formation nearby. The Sand Kunoichi didn't let up for a while though. Probably until her muscles couldn't go on anymore. Instantly, Kabuto was by her side helping her deal with the worst of the after effects of Teiya's technique. Still, all of them were smiling, smirking in the redhead's case. This was the first time they beat the Jinchuriki, they were in their right to be proud, Gyrobo thought. That was great work, Ig said, improving their mood further. Gyrobo didn't know if anyone else had noticed, but all of them looked up to the boy. It was weird and a little embarrassing sometimes, but Ig Sata was a monster and Jirobo would happily follow him if he could turn him into one too. Remember what I told you and work on what you need. Now, Yujito, let's step it up a notch, yeah. Wait, what? Jirobo's mind ground to a halt at those last words. Oh, you gotta be fucking kidding me, Teiya growled as they all saw Yujito's form casually stepping towards them from the rock formation as the dust that had previously covered the place was blown away. For once, Jirobo didn't mind the redhead's language one bit. They had given it their all and she was just holding back the whole time. How was that fair? Was red chakra forming around her? Fuck, Teiya added. Jirobo could only agree. Oh. Kurotsuchi. She hated Ig Sata's existence. She also greatly appreciated that he'd agreed to train her though. When she'd asked, she thought it would be a nice way to learn more, to get stronger. She'd expected it to be different, but at the same time she'd kind of figured it would be similar to how training under a Jounin was. Boy, had she been wrong. It was nothing like that at all. Ig didn't do anything by half. Technique and physical training was a hell of its own, but the spars. That's where it was revealed how truly bizarre the training was. And how hard it was too. Still, Kurotsuchi would never give a single word of true complaint. No way. She'd advanced more in the weeks she'd been training with Ig than she'd had in months with the specialized classes that her grandfather had arranged for her. So no, there was no way she would jeopardize her situation. She also found a new respect for Jinchurikis along the way. Facing Yujito on a daily basis had shown her just how absurdly strong they were. It had also made her think about how most people treated them. The fear everyone displayed made a whole lot more sense, but also, funnily enough, less. After all, why would one deliberately make someone with all that power at their disposal feel bad? Kurotsuchi guessed the key part was deliberately. Most of them didn't think about how they were alienating the extremely powerful individuals, she assumed. If one of them flew off the handle, it would be a disaster, she knew. She'd even started trying to talk everyone she interacted with into realizing what she had. It was a slow process though, mainly because she spent most of her time training with Ig's squad, who already knew what she did. Regardless, she was doing her best on both fronts. If she was to be Sashikage in the future, she couldn't have one of her best assets even considering leaving or, worse, attacking. The proud look her grandfather had given her when she told him as much had been enough to solidify her resolution. It was a shame that Han was so antisocial. The man spent most of his time meditating and, when he wasn't, looking at them training, barely saying a word. The Iwa Jinchuriki repeatedly said that they were interesting though, which she took as a good thing. At least he enjoyed doing that, she supposed. She was broken from her thoughts when someone sat in front of her. Okay, Princess Ig said as a way of greeting. Kurotsuchi's eye twitched, but it was the only show of how much she hated that nickname. I think I've gotten a good idea of what you can do, but I want you to make a list, just to see if there's something that you still haven't shown me. She thought about that for a moment. There were a technique or two, but those were very situational. Still, she looked down at the scrolls she'd laid around her to study while they were taking a break from training. She searched in between them to look for a notebook she used to note down things so that she could get started on that list. Anything else? Kurotsuchi had meant for that to sound sarcastic, but she didn't quite succeed on that. If you see Tamrai and Teiya group up during breaks, it might be a good idea to join them, he told her, and she turned to look at him. Those two. she thought incredulously. Doing something together. It had taken her all of 2 minutes to know that both girls hated each other's guts. There was no way. Sure enough, when she turned, both were sitting down, glaring daggers at one another but still talking. It was like seeing hell freeze over for Kurotsuchi, really. The only time she'd seen them work together without looking like they were a breath away from stabbing the other was during spas, and that wasn't even all the time. They do that to discuss strategy. You could improve on that front a bit too, Princess Ig told her, making her eye twitch again. He wasn't even trying to be mocking or condescending. He was just honest, and that made things even worse, really. They learn from one another. Adding another head to that should make things even better for everyone involved. Okay, that makes it slightly better, Kurotsuchi thought before sighing. I'll get that list done and go over, she replied, wanting to sigh. Great. You know where to find me if you need me. Oh. Kabuto Yakushi. You are who you are, he remembered Ig saying. It was all that he had in his mind, really. Every moment that he had to himself, when they meditated, when they finished for the day, when they traveled from the training grounds to wherever an explosion happened or to wherever they found a puppet person. That answer, simple and seemingly meaningless and useless. What we do and what we feel, is what we are, Ig's voice continued. What we do and what we feel, Kabuto repeated to himself. If he was honest, he didn't know how to take the answer he'd been given by the young ninja. Every time, he'd understood where his previous leaders had been coming from. Every single time, with Danza, with Orochimaru, with anyone that had been asked that question. Danza had thought that a person was defined by what they could do for their village. Orochimaru had thought one was the power they held. And so on they went. Kabuto had learned, quite early on in his career, really, that power was everything. It always came back to power. Some wanted power to fight, jutsu, techniques, strength, speed. Some others wanted power over people, through politics or through reputation or any other means. Money was sought so earnestly because it gave one power to get whatever they wanted, be it objects, people or whatever else. Thus, why people seemed to think that the power they had translated into who they were. Or, at least, that's what Kabuto had found throughout his life. What we do and what we feel, Kabuto all but chanted, like a mantra. What did that say about himself? According to Danza, Kabuto was someone. He'd been a great spy and medic. Willing to do much for his cause and always following orders. To Orochimaru he'd been much the same, and he'd also been talented in whatever he'd set his mind on. Both of them had led Kabuto to being one of, if not the best spy in the world. However, according to Ig's views, who was Kabuto Yakushi? What had he done? He'd spied, he'd lied, he'd faked. That meant he wasn't who he pretended to be, but that didn't give him an answer to who he was. What did he feel? If anything, that was an even harder question. He didn't know. He'd spent so long pretending to be someone he wasn't that he didn't even know what was an act and what was reality. He didn't know. Who am I? He asked out loud, looking up to the sky as if it would give him the answers he sought. He almost jumped where he sat when he heard a loud bark right next to him. When Kabuto turned to the side, he was greeted by the black and white dog that was Yuki. She was looking straight at him, for whatever reason. Then she barked again, and if Kabuto were Ig, he'd say that she looked curious about him. He wasn't though, and she didn't, because dogs weren't that expressive. Or maybe everything he knew was wrong, because she was doing a great job at convincing him otherwise. It was kind of scary, actually. "What's the matter? Does IG need me?" Kabuto asked as he mentally shook any thoughts about how much emotion the dog could convey. He almost started standing up to see what the demon that was IG Sata wanted from him. It wouldn't do to be too slow or something. The wolf in sheep's clothing had been nice so far, but that was because everyone was doing as told and Kabuto would be the last to try and see what happened if someone didn't. The dog barked again though, this time shaking her head from side to side. "What then?" Kabuto questioned this time, relaxing back where he was sitting. The only answer he got was the canine sitting next to him and just staring. He almost wanted to ask something again, but what would be the point? Was he going to spend several minutes trying to maneuver through a conversation of yes and no questions? If IG didn't want something from him, then that was it and the dog was unimportant. Kabuto blinked then, his mind conjuring images of IG and her. How the boy seemed to relax only when they were playing or when he was meditating. At any other moment, he was the demon that Kabuto knew him to be. During those moments though, he looked almost human, which was the most scary part. "I'm IG Sata. I like my friends. And I hate anything that endangers them. My dream for the future is to be the next god of Shinobi. In the meantime, I like drawing, free running, cooking and spending time with my friends." He made it sound so simple. Who said that our identities have to be complicated? Who indeed, Kabuto thought then. After all, few ever pondered what he did. Most people seemed to have no struggles knowing who they were. Am I overthinking it? He just might be. "We are what we do and what we feel," he mumbled, making Yuki tilt her head in a way that he'd almost describe as adorable. Before he processed the thought, Kabuto found his hand in between her ears, awkwardly scratching her fur. He blinked, wondering why he'd done that, and the only answer he got was "felt like it." It wasn't even a statement. It was a question, unsure and shy, awkward even. "Maybe it's just that simple," he mumbled, as he continued petting Yuki. "Right?" he asked, as if the dog had the answers he sought. Regardless, she barked and they both pretended that Kabuto understood her. "In the end, the only thing that matters is what we want," IG had said. "What I want," Kabuto repeated in his mind. "I should find out what that is first, I guess," he added, unsure, even in his own mind. "It's a start." "Oh. Tamrai." She'd been unsure of how much she could do in the mission that Sata had asked her to join. After all, what could she do that the monster that was their leader couldn't? He'd had a clear job for her, however, and she was more than a little proud that he considered her to be a capable strategist. Tamrai was also unsure about what she felt regarding her position in the squad though. Second in command was an important one, after all. A very important one. Where did Sata get the confidence of giving her that rank when she'd been part of the invasion until the very day it happened? His friendship with Gaara, if it could be called that, couldn't have been enough. He knew next to nothing about her either. And yet, he gave her that position anyway. She always felt the strangest mix between nervousness and pride whenever they had to divide the group to check on an incident. When he or she had to leave to see what their targets had done to poke at Iwa's defenses on their Jinchuriki. Whenever she was given free rein during a training session. Why? She thought, as she often did in such situations. They had been informed of an explosion, and IG had left this time. He'd taken Teiya and Yuki with him. Tamrai had hardly had to work together with the redhead and, to be frank, that suited her just fine. They were unlikely to work together unless they were in a truly serious situation, which might cause mistakes that they couldn't afford. Aren't they taking a little longer than usual? Kabuto asked, and Tamrai frowned. He was right, after all. It wasn't by much, but this was certainly the time a team had been away the most. The only reassurance they had was that Yuki was likely to be sent away to get support if anything happened. There was no way IG wouldn't be able to get her at least a moment to get away. He was a monster, after all, and no matter how much he told them that Ataksuki was likely to be worse than him, they would never buy it entirely. Even if they were stronger than IG himself, they couldn't be completely out of his league. Not to the point that he wouldn't be able to do anything, at least. That's what they hoped, at least, because if they were wrong. All of them tensed up, a shiver running down their spines as a familiar but very unwelcome feeling washed over them. Like cold water being dumped on them, IG's killing intent all but froze the blood inside their veins. They looked at each other, wondering what was happening. He'd never reacted quite like that during any of the other incidents. Even Yujito, new and much stronger than the rest of the team members, looked uneasy as they waited. They didn't have to do that for long though, because soon, the trio of boy, girl and dog appeared in the clearing before them. Tamrai was almost surprised when IG didn't immediately start barking out orders. Instead, he just stood there, seemingly seething at something that they had no way of knowing. Teiya certainly didn't offer them any clue, limiting herself to just staring at their leader like one would a burning exploding tag. Yuki, bless her canine heart, was rubbing herself against the wrathful monster as if she had nothing to worry about. "We are at the end of the rope here," their leader said in the end, voice controlled and cold. Tamrai realized then that she'd have preferred screaming and burning anger. "Iwa won't be allowing us to stay for long. We'll have to go after Ataksuki ourselves or be sent away." Tamrai frowned, already trying to come up with plans to do exactly that. Trying was the key word there, because she could hardly think at all with her heart frozen and quivering in fear. IG wasn't done talking, anyway. "The damn bastards wanted this," he growled, his red eyes flashing momentarily, turning completely the darkest blue, mimicking the night sky. "They were waiting for Iwa to lose their patience with us and send us away." Tamrai's eyes widened. That made sense. At the start, Akatsuki's little shows of power could have just been checks on the defenses. Attempts at gathering information. They had long since passed the time they could have used for that. "So, what are we going to do?" Yujito asked, and Tamrai was reluctantly impressed. No one else would have talked to IG at that moment. Not even her, and she was supposed to be the one that was trusted the most. Everyone, Shinshiriki included, took a step back when dark blue chakra started flaring around IG. She'd swear she had never seen something quite like that before. Not in that shade, at least. She'd seen light blue and she'd seen red from Gaara. This though. What even is that? She asked herself. "I'm sick and tired of this," IG hissed, his hands clenched into fists. Then he took a deep breath in. The chakra receded and the killing intent lifted from over them. He closed his eyes and when he opened again, they were back to their usual red. Tamrai didn't find him any less frightening after he calmed down though. If anything, she felt even more scared. A quick look at the rest of the team told her that she wasn't the only one. "We are finishing this mission. IG." Yujito called and his red eyes darted towards her instantly. He could tell that she was nervous, but he didn't much care. The picture of the house that Deidara had blown up was still fresh in his mind. The specific arrangement of the rubble into a mocking grin glared at him. The burnt bodies of the victims, a family that had nothing to do with the whole mess they were part of. They hadn't been ninja. He didn't remember ever coming across them. They were just a run-of-the-mill family. Normal people with normal worries that had the misfortune of choosing to live in a hidden village. The child they had was young too. Too young, he thought. IG shouldn't have been surprised, he guessed. However, part of his mind just couldn't help but assume that Akatsuki's problem was solely focused on their objective of gathering the Baijua. He hadn't been able to realize that everyone was in danger because of them, that they were missing Nin in the first place for a reason. I'm a fucking idiot, he growled to himself. What is the plan? The Jinchuriki of the two tails asked then, after a moment of pause. IG wondered if that had been because she was scared of him. First things first, he said, crossing his fingers in the shadow clone hand seal. Immediately, he punched it to dispel it. The thing could have done that without violence at all, but he needed to vent at least a little or he would do something stupid. Hell, he couldn't even really do it that way at all, he'd just dispelled it when his fist was about to hit. Shadow clone technique has gone up a level. That's nice, IG thought, although the words sounded hollow even in his own mind. He didn't have it in him to be happy like he usually was with such a screen. Shadow clone technique, LVL12. B-rank technique with which the user can create solid clones of themselves that dispel when damaged. Maximum number of clones, 12. Hand seal, 1. Consumption, chakra divides equally between the user and all clones. I really need to max this, he thought neutrally. Even if the backlash sucks. A second later, clones that he'd had guarding the surroundings dispelled too. Then came the aforementioned side effect. The splitting headache hit him like an A-rank technique, but he soldiered through it. He needed to process that information quickly. That was a bad idea, Hakai commented idly, but he could tell that she was already going over what they were learning too. Meanwhile, Kij grunted something that IG was sure meant you are an idiot or something along those lines. IG. Shut up, he told Tamrai. Get ready, he said then, his mind still processing new memories that he had no business having. One way or another, we are going after Akatsuki right fucking now. I've told you about them, you know what to do. Sir, yes, Sir, Taeya replied mockingly, but she had actually listened and would do as she was told. IG barely paid them any attention once they started moving. Oh. Thank you, young man, the old man told him kindly. No problem. Glad to help, the clone replied with a smile as he set the last box on the floor. It was almost like being back in Konoha, really. Actually, it was better. At least here, under a transformation technique, nobody could look at him and see the brother of the demon. He liked to think that they wouldn't even react to his normal appearance if he didn't wear his headband. Shame that he needed to remain hidden from Iwa's ninja. Nobody but Onaki could know that he'd spread clones around. Not even the other clones were aware of who or where the others were. He could have passed one by in the street and not know. The only clues were the wires that sometimes would sense another. The recognizance web had been cast. One of them was bound to pick something up. Oh! Can you believe her? A man complained loudly, his drink in hand. I work all day and then she has the gall to ask me to make dinner. She works half a day, she could take care of that, couldn't she? I mean, I'm sure she doesn't expect that every day, the clone offered neutrally. Just once in a while should keep her off your case, right? Bar the drunk dismissed with a wave of his hand. I have better things to do. Like playing something. Did someone bring the cards? He called loudly. The rest of the people in the bar agreed just as loudly with the idea. The clone simply sat there with an amused smile, witnessing the absolute chaos. Half the people in the establishment were idiots, but then again, they were inebriated. He supposed he could cut them some slack. It was interesting though, because it was a very adult setting. A setting that should make him feel like he fit in. He was supposed to be an adult, after all. Right? Truth was, he didn't feel like an adult anymore. He had the years, of course, even if he barely remembered his old life. Still, that didn't mean he'd suddenly turned into a child, even if his body did. Right? Maybe he should think some more about that. It would give him something to do while the drunks played, at least. Maybe he could. Then he blinked. The web sense around one of his threads had picked up something. Oh! Whoa! A kid breathed out while the rest gathered around him in awe. All of them stared at the drawing on the clone's notebook. He'd been making pictures of them all day. The children loved it, it seemed. Granted, they were easily distracted, so he'd had to play around with them when that happened. The mothers were certainly happy that someone was taking the time to entertain them. More than one had offered him a job babysitting. He'd taken a few as the days passed. It gave him an excuse to move around the village, at least. Can you, teach me? A little girl asked, holding up a notebook of her own and a pencil. She reminded him of Hanabi, with the shy look but the great reluctance to actually show that. He smiled at her and signaled the place next to him. Of course, he replied. Take a seat. Oh. Iji's red eyes opened once more, taking in his team. They were ready for a battle. If they were ready for this battle, he very much doubted it, honestly. That's partly why he hadn't rushed after Ataksuki yet. Unfortunately, they were running out of time faster and faster. They wouldn't get much further and Iji didn't want to wait and let more lives be cut short. Not if they weren't that of Ataksuki members, at least. I'll have to take care of one on my own if I want to get us all through this. Yujito should be able to at least entertain the other with everyone's help, he considered with a frown. It wasn't a plan he liked, really. Not only it relied completely on him being able to take on an S-rank missing nin, but it left him away from his team. They might be a bunch of little shits and previous enemies, but they'd grown on him, he guessed. He almost chuckled when he felt Tsuchigumo sending him a message. There's Yuki too, we can't let anything happen to her, Iji corrected with holding a smile. The Chakra Beast's relationship with the Ninken was strange, he'd found. Sometimes she hated the dog, sometimes she loved her. Better to leave that as it is, Hakai suggested, and he nodded. He had better things to focus on. Mainly the group of very powerful individuals intent on attacking all the Jinchuriki. Then he cracked his neck, taking a deep breath in to calm himself before starting to think up a plan. He had some information now, little things his clones had picked up over time. It wasn't much, certainly not enough to go after Ataksuki on its own. It's a start though. He mused before feeling another few clones dispelling, together with the subsequent input of information directly to his brain. He grimaced slightly as it hit him. Fortunately, it wasn't nearly as bad since there were fewer of them. Senjutsu of the spiders has gone up a level. Nice, Iji thought, closing his eyes and letting out a long sigh as he gathered his thoughts. I gave you all the information you need, Tumrai, Teiya, Yujito, you know how it goes for you three, he told the team, making the females of the group nod. Start going over how to deal with one of them with the whole team. I'll take the other one. Plan for both though, we have no guarantees we'll face who we want. The mentioned members nodded instantly. They were the ones with the best strategic minds of them all, really. Kabuto could do it in a pinch, but those three were the best. Tumrai was the one with the highest rank though. Yujito would have contended for it, but she was the heavy hitter if he wasn't present, which was already enough to have her hands full. Teiya could help the Sand Ninja before the fight, but once she started playing her flute, stopping to give orders would do more damage than help, really. Then, Ig sat on the ground and started meditating. Not for his mindscape or to recover chakra though, but to gather natural energy. Senjutsu of the Spiders LVL 12. The user gathers and balances natural energy with their own chakra to increase physical stats and gain a sensing ability. Physical stat increase, 120%. Sensing range, 480 meters. Let's hope that's enough, he thought, before calling another screen. It was a shame that Naruto's clone trick didn't work in this world. He'd tried, but since clones had half his chakra and he got both the chakra and the natural energy when they dispelled, he would always be short on the amount of the latter when he received them. It was a good thing that the team needed more time to prepare and, more importantly, plan, because Senjutsu was nowhere near easy to get quickly. Maybe when he had more levels on it, but as it was, he couldn't do it fast, forget about doing it mid-battle. He almost wished he had time to teach Suchigu. He paused. That was a risky idea, but then again. There's an idea, Kij commented, and Ig could almost hear the grin on his face. Eventually, he opened his eyes, which were now a beady black, just like most of the spiders he'd seen. Black circles appeared on his skin around his eyes, which he was sure was supposed to symbolize the extra eyes of the arachnids. He quite liked the look, if he was honest. At least the ones on his left, since the others clashed quite badly with his scar. Ig Sata. Main title, Prodigy. Secondary title, Aspiring Prodigy. Energy points, 1100/1100. Chakra points, 1375/1375. Natural energy points, 1374/1375. Beast chakra points, 0/0. Strength, 55. Dexterity, 58. Constitution, 55. Chakra, 55. Chakra control, a. Now, those titles just won't do here, he decided, quickly swapping them for the Weaver and Wielder of New Ivory. His eyes darted between other screens too, just to make sure that he wasn't forgetting a skill that could help. Once that was done, he took a deep breath in once more. Then, he focused on what his Senjutsu sense was telling him and he paused. Holy shit, he thought, blinking. He'd noticed that something was up when he got the memories, but experiencing it in the moment was much more detailed. Is Senjutsu supposed to be this detailed? I feel like I know everything that's going on around me. Focus, Ig Hakai reminded him, making him shake his head. Right, he mumbled, trying to process the information overload that Senjutsu was giving him. A moment later, he managed to think something through the whole thing. You've got everything ready. Everyone in the team nodded. Good, Ig muttered. Suchigumo, could you help me with some clones? he asked, receiving a quick confirmation from the beast. Then, he crossed his fingers and spawned as many shadow clones as he could. Go was all he said, and his lookalikes rushed out of the training grounds. Thanks, girl, he thought to Sachigumo, who barked enthusiastically at him, eager to go hunting with her dad. Wonder if that'll get less weird with time, he mused before focusing back on the team. You lot, follow me and tell me what you've thought of, IG ordered before moving. Then he paused and turned his head. Kurotsuki looked at him with the most innocent expression he'd seen her have so far. Too bad it was so extremely fake. He raised an eyebrow at her. I'm part of the team, right? IG had to give it to her, she tried. Yeah, no, he denied immediately, making her shoulders slump. When he saw her opening her mouth to protest. I said no. Go and complain to your grandfather. Everyone else, let's go. I'll know if you try to follow us, princess, so please don't. I'd like to avoid the trouble that knocking you out would bring. The girl even had the gall to pout at him. Honestly, one would think that trained assassins would be less childish. Although, he supposed it wasn't so bad that they weren't all just killing machines. Focus, he told himself. Now, let's go, IG said, immediately starting to move with the rest following. Thankfully, he avoided the possibility of an international incident since Kurotsuki stayed back in the training grounds. Oh. It took IG less than a minute to realize that senjutsu was bullshit. There was no other way to say it, really. How else was he to explain the level that the sensing ability reached? He could sense everything within its range. He could tell where everyone and everything was. He could tell anything that happened too. From the slightest twitch to knowing if that woman over there was feeling the hot weather worse than the people around her. From knowing that this person's heart was beating a little faster than it should to knowing that this kid's scraped knee was bleeding a bit because he felt the blood moving. It was only through his clone's training that he wasn't completely overwhelmed by it, really. Mental note, train this in person, not only through clones. Noted Hakai replied with an amused tone, making him blink. No matter how much time passed, he still wasn't used to them picking at thoughts that he wasn't projecting. They were doing it more and more too, which was almost concerning. Just imagining the potential for blackmail. You have no idea, she added then, clearly hearing that too and being highly amused. IG decided that that can of worms was better off not being opened. Thanks for the distraction though, he told her with the tiniest of smiles. Don't mention it, she waved off. He stopped his advance though, when he felt one of his clones go off. Apparently, he'd picked up on something before an explosion went off, almost taking the clone out. However, IG had to consider it before rushing in that direction. With the mockery Dadara had made of his last attempt at art, he had to wonder if they were baiting him to go somewhere. A clone was attacked over there, he informed his team. Ideas? He added, keeping it short. No need to waste time with unnecessary words at a moment like that. Atraptum said almost instantly. Duh. Teiya rolled her eyes, making the blonde's eye twitch. It is rather convenient, Yujito commented diplomatically. I know that, I have several directions I wanted to check and that came from one of them. Problem is that a normal bluff or a double one? He wondered out loud. To that, nobody had an answer. It was entirely possible, really, and they didn't have much information. Another clone in that area popped, this time before he could be taken out by a puppet. It was too convenient. Sachigumo, if you would. He was contradicting himself on the not wasting time front, he knew. It wasn't the first time, but he had priorities, even if they didn't sound like good ones. Treating Sachigumo right was one of them. She might be a great fighting aide, but she was also a child. His child, in her mind if nothing else, and that meant something. One such meaning was that he needed to do his best to keep her happy and well. The fact that she always agreed so readily didn't help at all, really. After all, she could be doing so because she wanted to please him, and that more often than not made him feel worse than he already did. She was more than a weapon, he knew that. The real question was, did she? I know how you feel, IG, but now's not the time, Kij told him with a soft tone that he wasn't sure he'd ever heard from him. The boy sighed and straightened as he formed the required hand seal. Then more copies of him appeared. He started pointing to one of his clones. Are on watch duty, he ordered, to which his look-alike nodded and left immediately. And you, guide them, he said, nodding towards where he knew the clones had popped. As for you, he continued, turning towards his group, who immediately straightened. Go with the clone, see if you find anything. If you find only one of them, engage and entertain him. If you find both of them and my clone can't dispel itself, buy as much time as possible and send Yuki to get me. Are you sure? You could end up facing both of them, Yujito said, already seeing where IG was going with his plan. He wouldn't say he wasn't doubting it himself, but it was the best he'd been able to come up with. It is a sound plan. Risky, but likely about as good as it possibly can be in this situation, Hakai commented solemnly. You aren't the only one that was holding back in training, IG pointed out. He'd had her raise how much she let loose while fighting the team or himself. He wasn't sure how much she could go over that, but he'd barely used Sachigumo's boost except to continue raising the skill. He was surprised though, because Yuki and Yujito weren't the only ones that were reluctant to go. Tamrai could have understood, after all, they weren't real enemies even with the whole invasion thing. She'd been reluctant to be part of that after all, evidenced by her deserting the effort in the end. The ex-Orochimaru followers were a surprise though. Granted, they didn't look particularly concerned, that much was true. However, just the fact that they weren't rushing to follow the order was a surprise. Wonder, are they just acting like that or am I overthinking it? Kabuto could be, the other two though. I'm not sure they can act very well, Kij commented, not really helping IG decide how to feel about what he was seeing. Now, go, he repeated his order, nodding his head and waving his hand. Really, will I have to use bloodlust? He asked himself. Fortunately, it didn't come to that, but the fact that he had to even think about it spoke for itself. You've been giving them what they want, I guess, Hakai reasoned. They would have followed Orochimaru to their deaths. Now that person is you. Or, at least, you are on your way to being that person. You need to be alive for that though, Kij pointed out. IG was pretty sure he wasn't the only one that rolled his eyes at that. It did have some effect though, because he felt determination flow through him. Sachigumo was having none of that, it seemed. We'll make it, Girl, IG reassured before grinning as something occurred to him. And then I'll introduce you to your aunts and uncles, he added, his smile widening as he felt the chakra beast's interest and excitement. Now, let's do this, shall we? Natural energy points, 1293/1375. He wasn't losing natural energy too fast, at least. It made him doubt how much he'd have when it came the time to fight though. After all, he had no delusions about how fast he'd be able to find Ataksuki, if he did at all. That was another thing, he was taking a risk trying to find them. Not only because they could be much stronger than he was, but also because I could fail to find them. That wasn't an option I could consider though, after all, there was too much at stake. If they were sent away, chances were that Ataksuki would get to Han. If that happened, everything would go to shit. People might even think that Konoha failed on purpose, or even worse, that we were colluding with Ataksuki. And that wasn't even getting into the mess it would make of the elemental nation's power balance. No, the mission needed to be a success. Natural energy points, 1204/1375. Was it a double bluff? IG wondered with increasing nerves. Had he sent his team to a fight with two Ataksuki members? Would they actually be able to hold them off well and long enough for Yuki to get him? He was reasonably sure that they could pull that off, but... Focus, he told himself, concentrating on the information his senjutsu was giving him. However, he found nothing. The more distance he put between Iwagakure and himself, the less he felt. The rocky surroundings registered, but they were dull, barely a shadow on his senses. Occasionally, he would feel a bird in the sky or some small creature roaming the mountains, but nothing else. Where are they? IG all but shouted. He considered just turning around and going to find his team. Maybe they could come up with a different approach. No, he decided, flashes of the dead bodies in the last piece of art that Deidara had left for them appearing in his mind. They had to end it and do it quickly. If they didn't, even if they managed to stay long enough to complete the mission, whatever progress their help could manage to make in improving relations with Iwa would be ruined. After all, there were only so many deaths that the stone could take before they started resenting them for taking too long. Natural energy points, 1089/1375. Come on, he mumbled to himself impatiently as he continued moving. Come on, he repeated before freezing. There, on the edge of his senses, he felt something. It was tiny, so very small that he wasn't sure if he'd be able to see it with his eyes. His senjutsu senses picked it up though. A diminutive insect-like thing that looked almost white. One that looked awfully similar to what he knew of Deidara's constructs. IG wanted to think that he'd finally found them. After all, something so small couldn't be a bait, could it? Except that it could, and he'd be taking absolutely no chances. There would be no underestimating any of the Ataksuki members that he promised. Still, as he slowly approached the area where the living clay sculpture was, he started feeling more and more. Not all of them that small though. There were insect-sized ones, there were dog-sized ones, there were even some that were even bigger than a person. IG was, once more, shocked by how much he could feel with senjutsu though. He could feel the chakra in the constructs. Moreover, he could feel. Someone flickered to his side and in a split second IG was already positioned with new Iberi on his right hand and its wire on the other. His currently black eyes stared into Deidara's sole visible blue one. Finally here, huh? You took your time, the blonde commented with an amused smirk. On his other side, IG felt Sasori appear with his armor forward/puppet on. A smile spread on his face. Why are you smiling? Deidara asked, his grin widening. We separated you from your team, you know. You'll be dead before they ever reach here. I thought you would go after them, IG commented. But thanks for doing me the favor of coming after me. It's appreciated. That's it, guy, for now. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.